Good morning, everyone. How are we doing? I'm actually blown away. I'm a little bit intimidated, actually, about how many people are in this room. Obviously, the crowd has grown immensely since last year. And today, I want to talk to you a bit about the asteroid itself, right? And what happens when it hits and what you do about it. So most of you are in this room today because that asteroid has hit and you're looking for answers. You're looking for change in your organization. So what do you do about it? Well, the reality is your world has changed. Your customer landscape has changed, your customer has changed, your competitive landscape has changed, and your ecosystem has changed. That only leaves one more thing to change, and that's you. And that's what we're talking about in the next 2 days. And what we're seeing in the face of change is organizations are struggling with this. Because it's not just about technology, it's actually about making a wholesale change in the way IT and the business work together with technology. Right, and for many of you in this room, the reality is you're probably spending collectively about 78%, if you're in the IT organization, of your effort keeping the existing landscape going. That's a huge challenge, right? That doesn't leave you a lot of time to think about the new or change things because you're running on that hamster wheel as fast as you can to deliver all the projects that are coming through from IT. But what you'll see over the next couple of days is large companies, small companies across industries are figuring out how to deal with this change and how to incrementally change the way they work with technology, change the way in which they engage with their consumers, and become more agile. We've got customers like McDonald's and Coca-Cola talking about this emergent phenomenon called the application network. And I'm going to explain to you a bit what that is and how it works. But before I do that, I just want to look at what change feels like within your organization, because it's fine talking about the macro, but often when you're in the boiling water and you're the frog, you don't know it's boiling until it's really hot. Well, some of you are starting to feel the heat at the moment and scrambling to think about how do I get out of that pot into a cooler bath. So let's have a look. I speak to a lot of CIOs, a lot of IT leadership, and the thing they always tell me is they need to move faster. Right? That's the first thing that comes out of anyone's mouth when we have a conversation with them. And the other challenge is the delivery capacity within their organization is not meeting the demand. And actually, the reality is of IT, it hasn't been invested in as heavily in the previous 10 years as it has in the last 2 or 3 years. So IT delivery capacity is actually at a pretty much a constant in most organizations. Yet the demands from the business keep going up. These asteroids keep getting thrown at you. You get cloud and SaaS. You've got big data analytics. You've obviously got mobile as one of the key application platforms now in your organization. But the big one is digital competition. The unknown, not knowing where the next competition is going to come from. The term, I don't want to be Ubered, is uttered quietly behind closed doors. And that's the reality for many different industries now. And the challenge with this is IT is still very centralized. And what that means is it's creating this massive IT delivery gap. Most CIOs I speak to will actually say that they're actually behind what they need to deliver on, and there's more coming down the pipe. And that's actually the impetus for change. The reality here, though, is you can't just fix these problems once off. You can't just connect a few SaaS applications and then go about your business as you were running it 2 or 3 years ago. You've got to change the way you think about connecting your applications, data, and devices, because this isn't going to get any easier. This isn't a point in time. This is an evolution. And now those asteroids are hitting your business, and there'll be more coming down the pipe. We've got IoT. We don't even know what's going to come after that yet. One such company that's going through this change is Unilever. And they look like many other organizations, right? They have thousands of applications. They have tens of thousands of interfaces. And they run hundreds of IT projects every year. Their challenge, like many of you in the room today, is they actually invent the wheel or reinvent the wheel every time they deliver these projects. They build everything from the ground up. They get no leverage from the project delivered over here that talked to SAP, from the project over here that talked to SAP. Right, that's a real problem. Not getting that leverage means you're not getting leverage in your business. You're not actually unlocking the value of your organization, and you're actually not using your resources in a smart way. So going back to this, what our customers are starting to do, and what we talk to our prospects about, and probably what we've spoken to some of you about, is spending some of that time in your IT organization focused on delivering reusable assets for key data sources, key assets inside your organization. right? So these are reusable APIs. They're data sources and they're capabilities in your organization that many people need access to. But you don't stop there. You don't just create these reusable assets. You actually package them in a way that a broader audience inside your organization can actually access and use, right? So that's the key rub here, is not just creating assets for reuse within your small IT organization, but enabling more of the business to be able to self-serve some of that capability themselves and drive some of their own outcomes. But this is a pretty big challenge because the application landscape has gotten ever more complicated. Right, we've got the traditional sort of monolithic applications. We've now got pretty large SaaS applications that we need to connect back into our existing IT landscape. We've obviously got the granular SaaS applications, purpose-built for almost every business need and in high demand by every area of your business. Every corner of your business is now using software to function and operate. You've also got the custom applications, and now increasingly the hundreds, if not thousands, of microservices are starting to pop up in your organization. For many people, you've also got devices, not just mobile, but IoT is just coming down the corner. Figuring out how to connect IoT to all that existing operational and warehousing landscape is actually a real challenge. And finally, right in the middle of this is people. It's your customers, it's your employees, it's your patients, it's your students. These people are the ones that need access to the information, but packaged in a way that makes sense for them. That's what digital disruption is all about, is turning your products and services into digital components that you can deliver to markets and people in new and interesting ways. And of course, the road to hell in this landscape is to do whatever all of you have done. Admit it, you've done this. You do quick point-to-point connections because you've got to get this project X out really quickly. So you say, well, I'm going to just connect those three systems together. The problem with doing that, of course, is you do that again and again over time, and you create this tight interlocking of applications and data inside your organization that completely removes your ability to move fast and change anything, because any one change in one of the systems has an unknown impact, downstream impact in other systems. Right? And the problem actually is not making the change itself, but it's actually testing it. Like figuring out what actually happens, what the knock-on effect is if I make a change in a core system. So what do you do about this? Well, you could just disconnect everything. Well, we know that doesn't work, right? The heart of digital, at its core, whatever you define as digital, is using assets, digital assets, to drive new value to some audience. So disconnecting things doesn't make any sense. Connectivity is at the core of digital, right? So that's not an option. You could do what a number of people have tried to do, is set aside the old stuff. You know, ignore the old and bring in a whole new set of applications. That, by the way, is called shadow IT. And many of you are probably 2 or 3 years into that and know how that feels like, because at some point, those applications have to connect back into your existing IT landscape. So that doesn't work. You can't set aside and rebuild. How about this? You could just kick the can down the road a little bit, keep going, doing what you're doing already, and hopefully the asteroid won't hit you. You could do that. That's not going to work. That's not going to work for everything that Greg said. It's not going to work because all the change that's coming. The only thing you need to get good at right now is not mobile. It's not getting good at cloud. It's not getting good at real-time data and analytics. It's getting good at change. And getting good at change means you've got to start to decentralize some of your core capability so you can bring more people into the problem to help solve it. So what's behind door number 4? So door number 4, we take your existing IT landscape. We're not going to change anything here. We can't afford, we haven't got the time, and you haven't got the budget or the inclination to take on another big IT project to try and organize this. You've tried that. 2005 was probably the last time anyone thought that might even work, and we're 10 years later and it hasn't worked, right? So you define some organizational paradigms in your existing landscape. So things like reuse of services. Reuse of services isn't about just packaging up a piece of data and making it available as a web service. That was the very SOA way of thinking. Reuse is about thinking about who needs access to this information and packaging it up for that audience. It's a different definition, especially for the architects in the room who've heard the word reuse a few times. The difference is that you're packaging for consumers. You're not trying to just put a bit of governance around a data source. Reuse of access. these assets can get used and reused in different ways inside the organization. Understanding that's going to happen helps you to shape the way you define the consumption model for that asset. I'll talk a bit more about that. The other thing is build connections as needed. This has to be emergent. This has to be from the ground up. It has to emerge from the projects you're already doing. So you can only build things as you need them, right? You can't go and try and build something big and new and hopefully people come. That just doesn't work. And you do that by defining simple abstractions. The API is probably the best abstraction we have in the enterprise for exchanging information between two parties. And when you think about reusable assets, that's exactly what you're doing. You're exchanging between other applications. You're exchanging between the BI department who's doing analytics and reporting. You're exchanging information with your partners who are doing B2B transactions with you. APIs are the perfect model for exchange because they provide a well-defined definition of the provider and the consumers, and they provide a way for you to manage that interaction very closely. And then something interesting emerges. As you start to build this discipline inside your organization, something pretty amazing happens, and we've seen this happen with some of our customers, is that you start to get a different type of landscape. And what emerges out of this landscape is this idea of the application network. And the application network is pretty simple. It's a group of applications, data, devices that are connected or linked together through a common one or two software protocols that expose some or all of their assets, their resources on the network. And then that network allows other consumers from other parts of the business to come in and discover and use those assets. So fairly straightforward, nothing too magical here. But the nice thing about the way this actually comes about is because in your projects, every time you connect two applications together, you think about opening up an API for the data that you're releasing. It's organized around well-defined units of value. And it emerges bottoms up. This isn't a big strategy that you have to drive, that everyone has to adhere to. You define some simple paradigms for your development teams to work towards. And you have very light sort of enablement teams to help those organizations understand how to build these things. It's recomposable. Everything that you publish in the application network is discoverable. It's managed. It's governed. It's secured. And you can take them as is, or you can take that building block, add to it, and publish a new building block. So you start to allow other people in the organization to add value to the network. The key thing here, especially for the architects in the room, this is not an architecture. It's a set of building blocks that you can build architectures on top of, right? So the application network bends. It doesn't break. You can plug things in. When you plug a new application in, it exposes some or even all of its assets that's available to it. Then you can control who has access to it. You can also plug things out and understand what the dependency graph is for things using those resources. The nice thing about this is governance and visibility is built in. And the key to this is every time you operate this way, and I'll go into more detail on this, that each node adds value to the network. Every time you add a new project or a new node to that network, it should add value, collective value, to the overall network. The thing is, this is not just about building APIs. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to talk a little bit about feelings. There's feelings involved here. There's beliefs. There's religious alignments with certain technologies. And there's a resistance to actually change the way we behave. Now, with the application network, what it really represents is a cultural shift. And this is important, right? Because we're very obsessed, and our customers and our prospects talk to us a lot about how do you deliver APIs and microservices? How do we organize ourselves to be more agile? How do we operate DevOps inside the organization? And that's really important for the production model. That gets you to the point where you can start shipping APIs and microservices to enable other people to do their job more effectively. And you publish reusable assets. The thing is, the key to this is not how many assets you have on the network, but how many consumers are getting value from the network. So the consumption model is critical here. And this is what makes it quite different from prior approaches. The focus here is actually building communities of developers around certain capabilities inside your organization, allowing them to self-serve and discover things that are available to them, and having a team of people that actually works with other groups inside your organization to enable them. Not to deliver the projects themselves, but actually to enable other people to get successful with the assets. So it's a bit of a big shift, and this is why it's an operating model change. Because what this does is IT now becomes not just the production of assets, but also enabler for the rest of the business to consume those assets. And the business now has to change a bit because they now are on the hook for delivering some of their own capabilities, some of their own projects. And the other reason this is different is the way in which you interact with this application network. So if you think back to SOA, and many of you probably, show of hands, who did SOA in the last 10 years? Some form of it, quite a few of you, all right. So SOA talked about reuse. It talked about well-defined interfaces. It talked about discovery. What it didn't talk about was consumers. And that was the big thing that was missing there. And when you think about why is this different from SOA, why is it different from the discovery protocols like UDDI and all the other stuff that came in with web services and SOA, is the focal point of this is all about building much more consumable building blocks in your organization that a broad range of people inside your organization can access and use. And it's self-serve. The idea is that they should be able to self-serve these assets. And these assets look like things like API portals. So API portals are great for developers, but they're actually not great for sort of casual IT people who are in your HR function who need to get data out of Workday. So for them, we have templates. These are sort of productized flows of information between one or more APIs that allow them just to fill in the blanks and move that information the right way. They can discover those on the application network. And finally, what I think we're going to see is the emergence of these apps or microapps on the application network as well, which takes a particular API and productizes it for a specific audience. Like a really simple example is, for most big organizations, file movement is still 70% of what you do. You're not going to change the way people move files in your organization. Forget about that. But what you do want to do is have those files go through an API so you can manage, control, and govern and see where the information's going. So the app you would build for that audience is give them a bit of code that they drop into their application that allows them to send and receive files, but it's calling the API in the background. Another example could be for business analysts who need access to data in the data warehouse. Right, you can open read-only APIs on top of the data warehouse very easily. In fact, Unilever is doing this strategy right now. But those BI analysts aren't going to understand how to use an API portal. What you've then got to do is productize the last mile for them and give them basically a data marketplace, a simple web page that allows them to discover the data sets they're looking for and plug them into their analytics engine. And if they don't find what they need, give them a simple way to request a new data set. So productizing the API beyond just the interaction and taking it further and making more of the organization be able to take part in the application network is critical. And that's really what we're talking about here is a wholesale change in how IT and the business interact, but doing it incrementally. So what I'd like to do now is actually introduce a guest speaker. A guest speaker from McDonald's. And they're going through this API journey right now. And they're doing all the things we're talking about. They're thinking about the same challenges. They're looking at the disruption in the market. And they're making some pretty big incremental but wholesale changes in the way they operate with technology. So please welcome me in introducing Director of Global Technologies, Mukesh David. Hey, how are we doing?
Good, how are you doing?
Excellent. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me over.
So first of all, why don't we start out just helping people understand what the journey is that you're going through right now?
So within McDonald's, we pride ourselves in serving great food, running clean restaurants, and being operationally efficient. That still remains, but with digital, the whole dynamics of how we operate and run our business is changing. What we're going through is a digital-physical blur, where we continue to do what we do best, but then merge it along with our digital lifecycle. Now, when we talk about a customer going to a restaurant, it's all about the transaction, right? The customer goes to the front counter, orders food. But with digital, that transaction basically explodes. We talk about understanding the customer need state, what happens to the customer before, during, and after the journey. And that is changing the way we go to market with our solutions. That's changing the way we build our systems. And that also is changing the way we get the customer insights and drive initiatives.
Fantastic. And obviously, there's a lot of change going on to make that happen because you don't usually know any of that information. So you're making a big shift in the organization. How are you managing that? How's that coming about?
First of all, whatever we do is big. Just our scale itself demands that we build systems that can be readily deployable across the globe. And when we talk about scale, right, we're in 115 different markets. We're building systems which have to not only scale to handle the volume, but you just talked about application networks. We're epitomizing that, right? When we go to every market brings its own set of legal laws, privacy laws, payment providers, and we are truly building systems that we can take and replicate across the globe and plug in different applications to enable those market endpoints. Our CI always talks about building systems like the Newton's cradle, right? The core needs to be strong, but we need to be able to flex around the edges. And the platform that we've been building along with the Mule is about building that core solution that'll be able to scale out across the globe and handle the volumes at scale.
Fantastic. So what are the early successes? Because you went live earlier this year. So
yes, we did. We don't have the option to go small, right? Just to give you an appreciation of how big the scale is. How many of you knew that we're the largest distributor of toys in the world, 1.5 billion toys a year? That's the scale. So everything that we touch is huge, right? So we were moving to this whole digital stack with Mule as a core. We deployed it, we went live, and just in the US, and we're at the takeoff stage here. We just launched this app, a digital platform. By the end of this year, we would have processed 3.5 billion transactions just to this stack within the US. As we explode this across the globe, you can imagine the scale and imagine the volumes that we'll be handling through this stack.
Fantastic. And I guess the other thing is a lot of people are just starting this journey. So how did you get started? How did you take the first steps to driving this strategy?
It was simple. Go big or go home. Now, when we started this journey, we had two options, right? Do something small, prove it out, and then replicate the model. Or we looked at it and flipped it over the head and said, you know what? If we prove it out for the biggest market, that proves that the stack works. That proves that our solutions work. And when we're building these systems, we have to keep in mind, and not many people know this, but we open a store somewhere in the globe every 14 hours. So as we're deploying these solutions, we have to make sure that these solutions not only manage, we are able to manage the solutions across the globe, but we are able to deploy them rapidly, and we are able to scale them. And what we started, our journey started with building the core infrastructure, building the APIs, and now we've enabled our digital channels to consume these solutions. But now what we're doing is moving inwards and connecting the different applications. So that's where the application networks kick in, and we're able to connect the dots behind the scenes.
Fantastic. That's a great story, and wish you all the future success. We'll be with you all the way, don't worry.
Thank you.
Great story. Go big or go home. McDonald's said it. There it is. All right, so what I thought I'd do now is actually walk through an application network by example, right? Because this is still pretty abstract. And the next 2 days, you're going to learn more about it and how it works. But let's look at a really simple example. So I picked something deliberately very mundane because we do a lot of these mundane projects, right? We do these apps that connect a few different data sources. In this particular example, we're going to provide order history and order status for sales teams on the road, but using a web application. So we have order data in the e-commerce system, we have inventory data in SAP, and we have customer data in SAP and Salesforce, fairly similar to many other projects you've probably done. And the road to hell approach to doing this is this. You take some technology, you can even take the MuleSoft platform and we'll help you do it faster, or you can custom build it or use your existing technology and just connect these applications together. And this is great, right? You get it on time, it's on budget, and meets requirements. The problem with this is you're not getting any leverage whatsoever, right? You don't get any reuse. You're actually fairly tightly coupled to the applications. You're not getting any value out of connecting Salesforce or SAP. The first time, you've got to go and connect it again the next time. And there's actually a lack of governance here. There's some governance in that model, but it's very centralized on that particular app. You build 1,000 of these, it gets very hard to govern anything or really see what's going on and what's moving between systems. So let's take the application network approach to this, which is you take the same applications where they sit, yet now you take the first step of not connecting directly to the application, but actually creating what we call a system API in front of the application. And a system API, all it does, it provides API semantics around for accessing and controlling access to the information, but just opens up the information in its fairly raw form. Don't get obsessed here about canonical models or anything like that. These system-level APIs are just about opening up the information needed for the application. And immediately what we've done here is we've actually now created a layer, an abstraction. And pretty easily, I mean, one of the nice things about the Anypoint platform, and Uri will talk about this a bit, is we make it very easy to build these system-level APIs all in one platform with the same developer team without any real friction, any new sort of operational skills or development skills. But you get consistent managed access. You actually get abstraction from the back-end systems. The next time I need customer information from SAP, I don't have to go to the system experts to go and get that information any longer. And the most important thing here is you actually have an API-led strategy in motion. This is the hardest step, I think, for organizations to take through. When 78% of your time is spent keeping the lights on and the network running, spending any time not delivering a project directly or seemingly adding more complexity to a project seems difficult. But that's the first step you need to take. Is you've got to go API first. You've got to be thinking about opening up your data, or at least the important data that matters to more people in your organization, through an API every time you go and touch it. Then what we can do in this landscape is we can put a new layer of APIs on top of this. And those APIs are actually geared towards enabling a broader set of consumers to access the information behind those system-level APIs. So in this example, I'm pretty sure that the customer data in SAP is probably quite complicated, probably has a lot of fields. I don't need all of those things for most applications. So I sift those things out, and I combine the information I have in Salesforce, and I create a simple customer API, and I do the same for orders, which will combine some of the order data and also the inventory data. Right, so these APIs are a bit different. They sit on top of existing APIs, which means they're actually pretty easy to build. I didn't have to do any heavy lifting to go and connect to back-end systems. But I've now productized an experience that more people in my organization, more developers can now discover and use with building their projects. And some other interesting things happened here. So I can build the application from these APIs. And what I've also done is I've broken down data silos. Suddenly, it was really easy to merge customer information from SAP and Salesforce. Notice, not once did I say single view of the customer. Right, the important thing of this concept is you don't try and build one view of anything. This is probably the death knell for SOA, is that you try to build the perfect view of the customer. And the reality is there isn't. If you speak to 14 groups in your organization, they'll give you a slightly different view. It's actually okay to have 14 different views of the customer, but now it's instrumented. Now you know who's using what view. You can actually even do consolidation later on, but you now have visibility. The other thing is I've created highly consumable services. So now I've got things that people outside of my IT organization can actually find and use. And the nice thing about this layered approach is I get layered security and governance. I actually have control points at each one of these APIs to decide who has access, what they have access to, what I obfuscate. It gives you a lot more control. And importantly, I can do that at runtime when I'm managing the network. I can manage the network as a set of policies of how information moves around it. So a very different way of thinking about managing that environment. And you build a discipline here. So you build your first project that way. That's how you get started. That's how you get the API strategy in motion. That's how you get your first set of APIs. And that builds out the first corner of your application network. And you can imagine other teams in other parts of your organization also doing the same thing. And every time they deliver a project, they might add 1 or 2 or maybe 3 new resources to the application network that exist in that layer and can be discovered and consumed by a broader set of people inside the organization. In this example, we had a few reusable services come out of this. And what those reusable services are now are resources that live on the network that allow other developers for the next projects to discover and use them. And then what you do, you have your central IT team or some of that team go and talk to these developers when they ask for projects and say, hey, look, Can you reuse some of these assets? Can we build your project maybe 25% from these reusable assets and then spend only 75% of our time building the rest? And as you build the discipline, you add more and more value to the network, and people can find more of that value and get further with their projects without having to build anything new. Right? So it's a discipline. This is change that happens over time. There's no silver bullet here. This is change. And there's feelings involved, and there's, people have got to change their motion. And what you need to do is give people the tools and the capability to actually behave in a different way. And that's what the application network does. And it does something really interesting to your organization as well. So now IT, instead of delivering projects, they're actually directing projects. They're ensuring quality, reusability, and they're thinking about the important things like security. Right? They can actually focus on some of the more important aspects versus just running on the hamster wheel, delivering the next Salesforce to SAP connection. It also means your system experts are now not needed for every single project. And also, if I create a service on top of SAP for customers, if I then need to go and create another service for inventory data, I've got a blueprint on how to unlock that information, and I can run that project more quickly. And this is what we're seeing in our organizations. Once you start doing this once or twice, you get the motion down and you start moving quicker. Also, architects can actually spend time architecting. A lot of architects in our organizations today spend time really chaperoning individual projects versus thinking about what's broadly more applicable to the rest of the organization. And then finally, and I think the key one to this operating model change, is the line of business themselves. Instead of just requesting every project, you now give them ways to self-serve their own assets and build their own projects. They have to change as well. But they can't change unless IT changes first and gives them something to respond to. So the application network really is there to change the clock speed of your organization. It does it by giving you these building blocks that makes you much more agile, allow you to respond to different demands in the business, and allow more people in the organization to take part in leveraging technology to drive new value. Like, we're in the age where every company is a software company. You can't keep all software centralized and siloed in the central organization. It's got to be able to be leveraged more broadly. And this actually emerges across teams. So you don't need a lot of governance structure to make this actually happen. And yes, you're going to have some pitfalls and you'll make some mistakes. That's fine. As long as you end up with these building blocks that are managed and governed, you know exactly what you have on your plate, and you can actually refactor later. The nice thing about this is everything that goes on the application network has analytics, security, and governance built in. You know exactly what's going on inside your organization. You can actually see data flows all the way from the APIs that your mobile apps are talking to all the way to the back-end systems. You don't have that type of visibility today, and you certainly don't have it across applications and across initiatives. So that changes dramatically for you. And the whole point is to really unleash the value of your enterprise. And you have two really valuable resources. You have the data and assets in your data center and across your clouds, and you have your people. Like, enabling more people to take part in the outcome of using technology to drive digital initiatives is critical. That's what the change is all about. And of course, the whole point of this is to thrive in the face of change. As those asteroids keep coming down on us, the only one thing constant is change. We're in a world of enterprise Darwinism. It's not the biggest or the strongest that survive. It's the most adaptable to change.